There we go. Using a different program this time. All right. I hope the audio is better than my previous Facebook Lives. We'll see. This is a test for later today when I do Simpsons stuff. Norm McDonald, from the book based on a true story, a memoir from the chapter titled First Week at Work. The languorous joy of Mohonk, where we had breakfast on cedar tables in the morning and spent our evenings laughing with drink and new friendships in front of a roaring bonfire next to the lake, becoming, as all things do, a memory. The next week, we were on the 17th floor of Rockefeller Center, a beehive of activity and stinging rejection, where we had to learn and learn fast. We were all just kids back then. Well, not kids, really, but we were very, very immature. I got to know my fellow freshmen very quickly. Jay Moore, Dave Attell, and Sarah Silverman. One of them I loved, and one of them I hated. I hated Dave Attell, but only hated him because I loved Sarah Silverman, and she loved Dave Attell. The first year was tough. Sarah, Jay, and I had been hired as featured players. It was a tough position to be in, languishing somewhere just shy of being a full writer and a full performer. We were expected to write sketches for the big dogs, but we were also allowed to write ourselves small parts in the sketches. The problem was we were stand-up comics, and we were competing with actual sketch writers who knew what they were doing. These writers were very smart and literate, and many of them had attended Ivy League schools. The roster was made up of Ian Max Tone Graham, Lou Morton, Dave Mandel, Steve Corin, Marilyn Suzanne Miller, Steve Lookner, and the brightest and funniest of them all, Jim Downey. Near narrator's note, I was suspicious that these might be fake names, so he didn't get outed by anybody, but I looked a few of them up, and they are writers from SNL that went on to be producers for like HBO series and such. And not all of them, but the few that I looked up. Jim Downey has a upcoming Peacock documentary about the fact that he was the longest. He holds the record for the most years writing for SNL from the mid-late 70s until 80, and then 84 to 93, and then from like the most of the 2000s so far as well. You just didn't get much smarter than these young lions of comedy. That's why I was so flattered when I learned they had given me the nickname Einstein. Hey, nice sketch this week, Einstein. I bet you have some good ideas for Alec Baldwin, huh, Einstein? Hey, Einstein, we're hungry. Can you get us a bunch of sandwiches, Einstein? That kind of thing. I was honored that these smart, educated folk had given me the moniker, but the truth was I was nowhere near as smart as Alfred Einstein. Alfred Einstein. Shoot, I wasn't even as smart as that new scientist, the one with the wheelchair and the funny way of talking, but I wasn't going to let the eggheads and blue stockings in the writer's room know that. Despite the high praise of my coworkers, I had trouble getting any of my sketches on the air, but I remembered what Downey had said and stayed close to the Fab Four and their leader, my friend Adam Sandler. Some of the writers would give me bit parts and skits, which allowed me to keep my job. Ian Maxtone Graham, Adam McKay, Steve Higgins, and Tom Hurley were especially kind, and Sandler was always sure to throw me a bone. One time I came close to blowing it with Sandler because I was a rookie and not used to the nuances of acting in sketches. Probably the toughest part of acting, and something you never learn in stand-up, is having the sharp wit to react when someone calls you by a different name. Sandler had written me into a sketch as his co-star. It was a huge opportunity for me, and I was determined not to blow it like I had blown every other opportunity in the joke I called my life. I studied that sketch from front to back, which I had been told by Downey was the correct order in which to study it. Jim Downey is also the uncle of Robert Downey Jr., which leads to Robert Downey Jr. being on the SNL cast in the early 80s. I had been told by Downey it was the correct order in which to study it. It was my big break, and I wasn't about to screw it up. On Saturday night, I was nervous but ready, like a great athlete. We were trying out the sketch at dress rehearsal. The only way you got the sketch on a real live show at 11:30 p.m. was to destroy at dress at 8 p.m. Sandler hit me with a first line. Hey, Frank, did you hear about that meteor hurtling toward the Earth? By this time, I lived in the same apartment building, the Regency House, that Adam lived in, and we shared an office, so I was good friends with him, and he never called me Frank. He always called me Norm. Naturally, when he called me Frank, I didn't respond. And so Adam repeated his line, but I noticed there was an edge in his voice. If I had been thinking, I'd have realized at this point that I was Frank, because Adam and I were the only two people in the sketch. But I wasn't thinking. I was looking at things around the set, one table in particular. It was made of brown wood and reminded me of a table I'd seen once in a table store. So the two of us didn't say anything at all. About 20 minutes passed and finally the show ended. Boy, Adam was really steamed at me about that one, and Lauren was too. Every Wednesday we would submit our sketches, and this is where the most curious thing would happen. From the beginning, I had submitted my answering machine sketch, which I knew would be a blockbuster and in which I had a starring role. The sketch was based on the first joke I ever told on stage and was the funniest thing ever. Seriously. I wrote the sketch and brought it to the table every single week. Some weeks, it would get no laughs at all. Others, it would get 2, 3, or 4. That's the way comedy works. They either hate you or they don't completely hate you. You can never tell which it will be beforehand. Every time I submitted the answering machine sketch, I would be sure to write Sarah Silverman in, as she was struggling, like me, and any airtime was valuable to her. Also, using Sarah gave me a dynamite end to the sketch. Sarah would say, "Boy, mister, these answering machines are really annoying," and I would say, "Frankly, lady, I don't give a damn," and then give Sarah a big smooch. This gave the sketch a big laugh at the end by spoofing a well-known motion picture, and it also allowed me to give a big smooch to Sarah, whom I was falling deeply in love with. At the time, Sarah and Dave Attell ruled the New York stand-up scene. Sarah, with her sly, subversive satire, masked by the sweetest of deliveries, and Attell, a joke machine to rival Dangerfield himself. She was elegant and unafraid. He was rumpled, unshaven, and a chain smoker. They were the Bogey and Bacall of the New York comedy circle. What chance did I have? What woman was going to choose Alfred Einstein over Humphrey Bogart? Still, I vowed I would win Sarah's love. No one at SNL knew more about matters of the heart than David Spade, so I just asked his advice. "Just ask her out, buddy," Spade told me. Just ask her out. So simple, and yet so incredibly complex. No wonder David Spade was so good with the ladies. I was pulling an all-nighter in the writer's room, trying to finish the answering machine sketch for Wednesday's read-through. When I spotted Sarah in the hallway, I decided to make my intentions known. "You're dreadful pretty, Sarah," I said, "and I'd be honored if you would lay down with me. And not in the restroom either. I will take you out to a restaurant, and you can order beefsteak that I will pay for. We will coo and whisper and smile meaningful smiles, and we will reduce the whole world and its people to our small table and the two of us. Then afterward, I will take you to my bed, and we will be like swine." She ran away, and I realized that I'd made a big mistake. You see, Sarah was a liberated woman, and she didn't need any man to buy her beefsteak. She made exactly the same salary I did, minus the 30% that they automatically took off an account if she was a woman. And what a woman! In a way, Sarah's lucky she never met the payroll clerk at SNL, or they might have taken off 60%. The day after my clumsy pass, I was served a restraining order that said I was not allowed to be within 100 yards of my loved one. This made the cameramen on the show furious because when Sarah and I were in the same sketch, they had to resort to ridiculously wide shots. I fell into a deep depression, heartbroken. About a week later, I walked into the Comedy Cellar to do a set. I had some new material and wanted to try it out. They had recently come out with a new telephone that had its own built-in answering machine. And the first thing I saw was the two of them, Dave and Sarah, canoodling at a corner table. They may as well have been up in a tree, Kissing, while I saw red and went over to Colin Quinn. Colin was and is the smartest comedian alive and a great guy to boot. This was long before he joined the cast of SNL and destroyed my life. "Colin," I said, "you're from New York. Where does a guy go to hire a hitman?" Colin laughed. "What do you want with a hitman?" "Can you keep a secret, Colin? I plan to have Dave Attell murdered, and then, once he's out of the way, convince Sarah to lay down with me." I should have paused to give Colin a chance to answer my question regarding his ability to keep a secret before I spilled my whole plan. As it turned out, Colin Quinn was a huge blabbermouth who wound up prating like a magpie about the entire murder plot as soon as he got the chance, but I didn't know that then. Don't worry, he said. There's between $50 and $75 in it for you. Oh, I said, excuse me. Are you completely serious about this, Norm? I mean, there's plenty of fish in the sea. I knew right away he wasn't talking about fish. Colin was the king of metaphors. He meant there were plenty of ladies in the sea. No offense, Colin, but the longer it takes for me to listen to your yapping, the longer it will take to have Dave Attell murdered and that very night lay down with Sarah. Colin looked nervous, but finally said, All right, I know a guy. Colin called me the next day and said it was all set up. I was to meet the hitman at the corner booth of the Stage Deli the next day at noon. I asked Colin if he could change it to the Carnegie Deli because it is a far superior deli. He said it was too late, so I thanked him, but he had to have heard the bitter disappointment in my voice. I mean, if you're going to meet a hitman at a midtown deli, why the Stage Deli? Why not the Carnegie Deli? The next day, I sat in the Stage Deli and waited for the hitman to arrive. He was late, so I spent my time thinking about the delicious pastrami on rye they had at the Carnegie Deli and how I would not be eating one today. I saw a police officer enter the joint, and I got nervous. When he slipped into the booth across from me, I got really nervous. You Norm, he said. I'm not talking to any coppers, I said. Who's a copper? The cop asked. You are. I'm no copper. Where did you get a ridiculous idea like that? You're wearing a police uniform. I was very good at spotting cops. He looked down at himself and he saw that I was right and began sweating profusely and stuttering and hitting his forehead twice with the palm of his hand saying, Stupid, stupid. It took him a few minutes to compose himself, but finally he said, Oh, this. You see, I've been walking the beat the last 10 years and I just got promoted to undercover cop. But you know what they say, old habits die hard. He seemed relaxed again. So you're an undercover cop, I said. Why should I talk to you? Well, he started the whole sweating and stuttering and hitting his forehead routine all over again. I just got up to leave when he blurted out, I'm a bad cop, a dirty cop. You are? Well, of course I am. That's what makes me such a good hitman. I have my own gun, and nobody ever suspects a cop. The waitress came up and addressed the hitman with the police costume on. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your voice down. You're frightening many of the customers. The hitman had been speaking very loudly, in a sort of a panic. I would find out later that he wasn't a bad cop at all. I mean, he was a bad cop in the sense that he was no good at being a cop, but he was not a corrupt cop. He pulled out a large tape recorder and hit the play button and the record button simultaneously, and we began hammering out a deal. He would murder Dave Attell, and in return, I would give him $355. We haggled for well over an hour, but finally settling on the $355 figure, which made me very angry after he arrested me, and I realized that he could have just accepted my first offer and saved us both a lot of time. When I got to the precinct, they told me I was allowed one phone call. Hello, Colin. It's Norm. You're from New York. Where does a guy go to hire an attorney? I should have grabbed a water. I didn't realize this was going to go. Hang on. Be right back. I got another thing to read. Damn it, Norm. Had to go and die on me today. I wasn't prepared for live reading. So let's go. Let's get into the complete uncensored history of Saturday Night Live, which keeps getting updated every year with the newer, boringer stories about the newer casts. But there's a section here about that looks like it's all just about Norm and the Weekend Update experience. Friction between Saturday Night Live and network executives continued into the second half of the 1990s. Although Jim Downey, that name again, was held in awe by his peers, and Norm McDonald was Chevy Chase's favorite among all those who succeeded him in the Update anchor chair, the team had become the target of an essentially one-man crusade. NBC West Coast president Don Ohlmeyer had earlier declared war on Downey as a program producer and got him thrown out in early 1995. Downey resurfaced thanks to artful maneuvering by Lorne Michaels, his duties limited mainly to the update segment. This was fine with him, but not with Ohlmeyer, who wanted him out of there too. By the 1997-98 season, Ohlmeyer was even more adamant about getting rid of McDonald. It had turned into a veritable fixation. Ironically, McDonald had originally taken over Update with Ohlmeyer's implicit blessing. He'd been adamant at that time that the position not be given to an SNL veteran who had long wanted it and was an old pro at ruffling peacock feathers, Al Franken. That had all been private, but now Ohlmeyer's interventions were loud and public. In the entire tumultuous history of the show, it had probably never been the focus of a more explicit conflict between the business and creative sides of the network, nor had there been a more concentrated assault on the independence and integrity of Lorne Michaels. Insiders and outsiders alike, meanwhile, saw it as something other than a coincidence that the Downey-McDonald updates were mirthfully merciless on the topic of OJ Simpson, that well-known, unconvicted murderer about town who'd hosted the show in its third season and, more significantly, was a longtime golf-playing crony of none other than Don Ohlmeyer. Excuse me. James Downey. I don't think anyone needed to tell me particularly. I mean, Lorne had been telling me for 2 years now how unhappy Don Ohlmeyer was with me. Ohlmeyer was practically putting out memos saying, "Do not ask or accept advice from this clown." Lorne was probably put in a weird bind because I was doing Update with Norm McDonald, because I know he didn't like that approach to Update. He thought it was too mean and cold and nasty. So he would have been in a strange position on principle, wanting to fight and run interference for us, even though he didn't actually like it that much more than the network did. I think I'm right about this just from knowing him. Norm McDonald, cast member. Me and Jim were kind of alone at SNL, especially when the new bunch came in. In many ways, they resented Jim because he was smarter and funnier than them, and he was like the old crew, you know what I mean? When he went over to Update, I think they would have been happier to have him gone. After Jim got fired as a producer, I think it shocked the new establishment there that I wanted him to come do Update with me. It was weird for everybody. Jim liked just doing Update because we figured it wasn't that important to the show, and we could just do whatever and they'd leave us alone. I didn't even want to go to dress rehearsal because I didn't care about the audience reaction at all. It would have been fine with me if we never rehearsed it, and I could just do the jokes that I thought were funny. Because I have more faith in me and Jim than I did any audience. I just like doing jokes I like, and if the audience doesn't like them, then they're wrong, not me. Don Ohlmeyer, NBC executive. That was part of the problem. Not part of the problem, that was the whole problem. I think what you have there in Norm's statement is the quintessential issue. When Saturday Night Live is really good, they do care about what the audience thinks. And when Saturday Night Live is not really good, they're kind of doing it for themselves and their pals. That was what I felt was the weakness of Weekend Update at that time, which was they were doing it for themselves. There were a lot of inside references. There were times when you would go an entire update with nothing more than a titter. You can pull out all the tapes. I've looked at them 10 times and looked at them and looked at them and looked at them because I wanted to make sure I wasn't being an asshole in this. Chevy Chase, cast member. Norm said he didn't care if the audience laughed. What's shocking about that? That's sort of the way that I felt. That as long as 6 guys on a couch behind that camera that I was looking into laughed, and I knew those guys, then I was there. One has to do that, and one has to figure what's going to work and what isn't. Of all the other Update guys, the one who was the funniest to me was Norm, because he just came out and said it. Perhaps that's the writing, Jim Downey and those guys' writing, but it's also Norm's quality of I don't care. You can take that too far in your life as an entertainer, performer, and maybe it would affect, in a negative way, other things that you do. I'm just suggesting that it's a quality that lends itself to being successful as an Update guy. And as an actor on Saturday Night Live, which is not caring whether people say you're good or not, only that you have your integrity and that you think it's good. Sorry, just checking the comments, making sure everybody can. Looks like it's going, it's working. You can hear me. Hello, hi Karen, hey Mark, hey Lori, hey Sean. Norm McDonald. I said fuck one time during update. Something got caught in my throat and I went, what the fuck was that? If I hadn't brought it attention to it, I don't think anybody would have even heard it. I pointed it out because I couldn't believe I said it. Although I'm usually shocked that I didn't say it, you know what I mean? It takes a lot of discipline not to say fuck. In sketches, you've got to say what's on the cards, but in update, I would do the joke and then say whatever I wanted afterwards. So when you're just talking like that, you can easily say fuck. I like to say it a lot in real life. Anyway, Ohlmeyer said it was cool. He was good about it, and he said he knew I didn't do it on purpose. Ohlmeyer should have fired me then, but he was cool. As for Lorne, he left us alone for the most part. That's what I liked about Lorne. Sometimes he would say, you don't want to do a joke like that because you want to avoid a lawsuit. You know? He'd always say, you don't want to be sued. But he'd let us do the jokes. Sometimes even about his friends. He has friends that are super famous and stuff. He was cool about that. I probably wouldn't let people do jokes about friends of mine. We wanted Update to be good. But we didn't think that we had to pander. If the rest of the show was pandering, then we thought we wouldn't have to. Agreed. So then I started getting the sense that they were unhappy. These people don't come up and talk to you. You just get it third hand and stuff like that. Ohlmeyer and his crew thought every joke on Update should kill and that the audience should be clapping and cheering and stuff. They thought Jay Leno did that every night with his monologue, so why couldn't we do it one night for 5 minutes where it would just be wall-to-wall laughter and applause? My response was, I hate applause. I don't like an audience applauding because, to me, that's a cheap kind of high. They kind of control you. They're like, yeah, we agree. That's all they're doing, saying they agree with your viewpoint. And while you can applaud voluntarily, you can't laugh voluntarily. You have to laugh involuntarily. So I hate when an audience applauds. I don't want to say things that an audience will agree with. I don't want to say anything that an audience already thinks. And so that thing with Update was not to do these same jokes where you said that, Pat Buchanan was a Nazi or some ridiculous thing that wasn't true, but that everyone would applaud because they'd already heard it somewhere else. Update was never a big pep rally when I was there. It was never a big party. So I think the network started going, it doesn't seem like as much fun as it should be. Don Ohlmeyer. What you had then was you had people tuning out during Update. And that had never happened before. You never had dropout during Update. Warren Littlefield, NBC executive. I don't think Don wanted to exert control over Lorne in ways that Lorne didn't want to be controlled. It was a battle of wills and egos. I think Norm McDonald ultimately was a symbol. Don just didn't get it. He didn't get Norm McDonald. Ohlmeyer could be the 800-pound gorilla. We said, you know what? You've got to go ask your kid. We'd sit in a meeting and go, Don, we disagree. It was funny. It wasn't a perfect 90 minutes, but it was funny. I don't know. Maybe he was watching it alone at 11:30. It was also before Don was in rehab. Lorne Michaels. I remember one night Don and I were having dinner at Morton's in L.A. by the bar where he can smoke, and he would have his cheeseburger and his glass of milk and his 4 packs of Marlboros. I sat there playing with my swordfish thinking, if he outlives me and it turns out to be just a gene pool, I'm going to be furious about it. Fred Wolf, writer. Ohlmeyer was completely out of line. Norm McDonald is one of the funniest guys I ever met, and Jim Downey is the funniest writer I've ever met. And so if those two guys get together and they put together Update, then I have faith that Update is a really funny thing coming from those two guys. I've been on a lot of shows that have been sort of faltering or whatever. The network decides to step in and alter the original creative vision and sort of dabble with it, and it never worked. It's never worked. I've never seen them improve things and ratings on any show once they step in. James Downey. And the thing that used to drive the network crazy was, why does he just stare into the camera for a minute after the joke? And we did it as often as necessary for the audience to get the joke. And there'd often be a delayed reaction because some things weren't right there on the surface. Norm McDonald. Sometimes I would have to be in something. For a while I had to go do Bob Dole, so I'd fucking have to put on some fucking mask and go do it. So that would get in the way. All I really cared about was Update. But that fucking Bob Dole, man, I wrote a couple of sketches that I thought were funny for Bob Dole to do, and then all of a sudden he's the candidate, And then I have to appear in people's fucking sketches every week on some lame premise. One thing I started hearing toward the end was, you've got to fire Jim. You know, it was almost as if you fire Jim and everything will be cool and you can keep going with Update. I had no interest in anything but Update. Andy Breckman, writer. I was in the studio the week after OJ was acquitted, and there was this tension in the country because the country was divided, and it was this weird sort of thing. It was almost something that was hard to think about, especially in mixed company. You didn't know where people were coming from. And the cold opening that week on SNL, you might remember the sketch. I don't know who wrote it, and it wasn't even on paper that funny of a sketch. And in read-through, it didn't kill, but the sketch was this. Tim Meadows as OJ is back at his old job calling the games at him. Sorry, I'm remembering this sketch now as I'm reading this. Excuse me. He's back at his old job calling the games at ABC's Monday Night Football. And the first joke of the sketch was OJ on the field doing commentary about a play. And he's doing the thing that Madden does wherever he writes on the screen and he's joining the marks together. And eventually they spell out, I did it. And that was the first joke of the sketch. When he wrote that out, I was in 8H and the place exploded. Like I've never heard a reaction in my life like that ever. It exploded. But it wasn't just laughter. It was almost a release like, oh, of course he did it, you know? And thank God somebody said it out loud. And there was applause and laughter. There's no place else that could have done that. Letterman and Leno danced around it, and they were very coy about it. But there was nothing that came close. And Downey, bless his heart, he was relentless, even after that acquittal about OJ. Don Ohlmeyer. My only concern was what I thought was best for the show. I might be wrong or full of shit, but it wasn't like I had some political agenda. The OJ Simpson thing was over by this time. I put everybody at NBC in a very awkward situation, you know. I was brought up that you don't desert somebody who's been a friend for 27 years because he's at the worst point in his life. My decision to be supportive of OJ as a person caused a tremendous amount of grief to people at NBC, to my family, to my kids. I did it. Well, then maybe you reevaluate your choices, Val. Jeez. Now Norm's gone and OJ's still with us. I did it because I wasn't going to desert somebody who had been my friend for 27 years. But when the whole situation with OJ started, I called Lorne, I called Jay Leno, and I called Conan. And I said, look, this is awkward, but I'm telling you, if you in any way lay off this situation out of some concern for what I might think, forget about my feelings. Just what I might think, you're crazy. You have a job to do. It's the biggest story in the country right now. And you have to deal with it the way you think is best. That was the difficult part of the Norm situation because it resurrected all the OJ stuff again. You know, life isn't fair. But that to me was like, what does this have to do with that? Robert Wright. Anything about OJ had an incendiary effect on Don, but Don is a very easy guy to misread. He's so blunt, but you can't necessarily read into the bluntness that he's unfair. I know it sounds contradictory. He can say something that appears to be completely arbitrary, but his actions generally were almost never completely arbitrary. It would be very easy and consistent to conclude that because Norm said some things about OJ which were inflammatory to Don, that would be a great reason to get him off the show. But I never found a lot of evidence of that in anything else. He could get very angry about people who were anti-OJ, but doing anything about it from a business standpoint was never part of the agenda. We'll never know the answer to that one. He didn't think Norm was funny, and he probably didn't think the OJ stuff was. It was like the word against God on OJ. The enemies list was a long list. Warren Littlefield. Don knew if he ever so much as looked cross-eyed at a television set with anybody from NBC around when Jay was doing an OJ joke, there would be a problem. Don would stay far away from any comment ever about OJ. He never took it out on Jay, and nobody got more out of OJ Simpson than Jay Leno did. Don separated himself from saying anything to Jay, but you're wonderful, you're great. Back to Norm. I was in LA over Christmas. It was the Christmas that Chris Farley died. I think it was right after Christmas, and they told me that Chris had died, and then like 3 hours later, they told me about Update. But by that point, who cared about Update? Because Chris had just died. Somebody told me Ohlmeyer has said, I want two things. I want McDonald fired and I want a best of Chris Farley ready to go. So then we went to the funeral in Wisconsin. That was really sad. They said, Oldmeyer wants you out. I still didn't think it would happen in the middle of the season, and no one would come right out and say it. The first week back from Christmas, no one would come right out and tell me what was going on. Lauren had a hard time telling you bad stuff. I had to do update that Saturday, and I'm like, am I doing it or not? And they're like, we don't think you are. So I said, somebody's got to tell me I'm fired. But nobody wanted to do it. So they said, you can phone Oldmeyer. So I had to phone Oldmeyer myself, and Oldmeyer was kind of surprised that I was calling him. He just thought it would be taken care of. It was kind of weird, you know? I just said, well, ha ha ha. He was kind of good cheer, you know? He said, oh, change has got to be made, you understand. And I go, well, what's the problem? And he goes, it's just not as funny as it should be. And so then I'm like, you don't think I'm funny? I said, people around here are saying it's all you, and they all want me, and it's just you that doesn't want me. And then he was kind of surprised. He goes, is that what they're saying? They want me to be the bad guy. Don Oldmeyer. Lauren's point at the time was, just let it go for the rest of the season, and we'll make a change in the summer. And he was probably right. Sometimes I get too wrapped up in something that needs to be fixed, and it won't be fixed unless we address it. But the Norm thing had been an issue for me for over a year. The Oldmeyer era proved to be one of the most difficult periods for Michaels. Everyone knew Oldmeyer had complaints about the cast, particularly Norm McDonald and writer Jim Downey. At one point, Michaels, hoping to protect McDonald and buy time, tried to placate Oldmeyer with the promise, if you feel this way at the end of the season, I will make a change. But as November became December, Oldmeyer grew increasingly angry and frustrated, calling on Michaels to set up a dinner meeting in Aspen, where both men would be spending the Christmas break. Then a week before Christmas, Michaels received word that Chris Farley had died. The funeral would be held in Madison, Wisconsin, Farley's hometown, on the very night Michaels was scheduled to have dinner with Oldmeyer. Michaels flew to Madison, along with cast member Tim Meadows, attended the funeral, spent time with Farley's family and friends, and flew back to Aspen in time to keep the appointment with Oldmeyer. Although Michaels knew the dinner would be difficult, he also thought, perhaps naively, that since he had just buried a young man he truly loved, one whose death had been, unfortunately, drug-related, and had gone through a painful ordeal with Farley's aggrieved family, maybe Oldmeyer would tread lightly and not be fulminating at full force. But Oldmeyer seemed unfazed by the circumstances and in no mood to relent. He looked at Michaels and declared, Norm's got to go. That's why the firing happened when it did, in the middle of the season. Some believe that if Michaels hadn't been so emotionally drained by Farley's death, he might have been better able to put up a fight and save McDonald, but it was not to be. Norm McDonald. I was never bitter. I always understood that Oldmeyer could fire me because he was the guy that owned the cameras, so that didn't bother me. Oldmeyer seemed honest to me about it, straightforward. I was always happy that SNL gave me a chance. Other comics, when they were young, wanted to be on Johnny Carson. To me, it was like that. You get to be on Saturday Night Live. It's a dream come true. And then everything after that is not going to be as good. To me, just getting there was the thing. Warren Littlefield. Of course, myself and others said to Don, why are you doing this? What is the agenda? We finish out the year and make the change. I don't think Don felt he had to send a message, and there are times when Don just felt he had to exert executive power because he could. I take it back. I'm sorry, I misread. I think Don felt he had to send a message, and there are times that Don felt he had to exert executive power because he could. The public firing was probably the greatest perception ever that it wasn't Lauren's call. That was probably the toughest thing Lauren ever had to endure. Really unfortunate. Norm McDonald. So then I thought it would be funny to go on Letterman and talk about it, because I knew that Letterman had been fired from NBC and stuff like that. I got fired on Monday, so I called up the people at Letterman and said, hey, you should have me on because I got fired. It would be so funny if I just said on the show that I got fired, And so they booked me and I went on. I told Lauren that I'd already been booked on Letterman and I could still do it, and maybe I shouldn't do it. And he said, go ahead, do it. I didn't tell him that I had done it on purpose. And I remember Letterman during a break goes, this is like some Andy Kaufman thing with the fake wrestling, right? And I go, no, it's serious. Like, he thought it was just a gag. Then the next day, there was some big reaction at SNL. All of a sudden, people didn't want me to get fired because they saw it as some sort of a big network president against the little guy. So then they pretended like they liked me the whole time. Lorne was trying to figure out what to do because he didn't want to look like he'd lost control of the show or the network was making decisions for him. After that, I just tried to get off the show. Ohlmeyer wouldn't let me off. He just wanted me to not do Update and do like sketches or whatever. I didn't want to do sketches. So everybody's kind of embarrassed about the whole situation. They just want you gone. But Lorne had always told me, in the show, you have to have an exit strategy, which is a way to leave the show in exactly the right way to move on in show business. So I guess after I got fired, my idea was to have an exit strategy to get out of there without just slinking away after getting fired. And that worked to some extent, in the sense that it gave me a little bit of publicity, which is sort of currency in show business. Tim Herlihy, writer. I'm very good friends with Norm and very good friends with Colin Quinn, so it was tough making that Update transition. It was like right around the time Chris Farley died, that first week that we were trying to put together Weekend Update, with Colin wondering whether Norm was going to show up or whether it was all going to reverse. We kind of had to plow into it and put together a whole new set and a whole new everything and try to get Colin ready. They're going to fire Norm. They're going to fire Norm. And, you know, this had been going on for weeks and weeks. And all of a sudden, they fired Norm. We just kind of couldn't believe it. There was a real sense of disbelief. And there was a sense that this was just the latest chess move in something that was going to go on for a long, long time. Colin Quinn, cast member. There was no inkling. Maybe some people knew, and we just didn't realize it. But there was no inkling. I think at that point, I was well enough known in the show where I probably would have heard if there was some big rumor flying. I mean, sure, a couple of people knew, but there was no inkling. And Norm had been so good about letting me do pieces on Update. Not only were me and Norm tight when shooting pool, I lived in the same building as Norm. So it's like, here he is 10 floors below, and I'm hearing this shit. What happened was they called me and told me about Norm just because we knew each other. So it's like, oh my God. But here's how I felt. I felt horrible that it wasn't going to be Norm, and I even said it to Lorne when I met Lorne after that. If it's not Norm, I'm not going to stand here and say I don't want it, because I don't want some other guy from outside who I don't think is fucking funny to take the job because I was being respectful of Norm, and I think Norm felt the same way. Norm was such an ally of mine, getting all my Update features on, that in a way, he had a lot to do with the fact that I would be the guy to take over for him. Huge whore, he would say that a lot, and in that Canadian accent of his. It's perfect. Yeah, he's a funny fucking bastard. Huge whore. You know, if there's one criticism of him, it's that he should have used that on more people. In retrospect, I could imagine how people would be like, Quinn's not ready for Update. Part of being a comedian is the delusion that you should be on stage at all times. Comedians could watch like Robin Williams and Chris Rock go on, and the whole audience go crazy, and the whole time I know what they're thinking, even the youngest new guys. I should come to work this crowd. I'm telling you, I could kill right now. That's how comedians think. I see the young guys looking at me like, move over, you've had a nice run, beat it. Lorne Michaels. Don's not stupid, Don's not even evil, but Don is like the greatest high school football coach ever. He'll beat you to within an inch of your life, and he'll force you to do things, but he won't abandon you. I don't think Conan O'Brien would have stayed on the air if not for Don Ohlmeyer. Colin Quinn's reign as Update anchor was relatively short-lived. When the show returned for a new season in the fall of 2000, head writer Tina Fey and cast member Jimmy Fallon took over Update and made it a showpiece again. It was no longer a parody of a newscast. Now it was just a sexy pair of smart alecks sitting around and making fun of the world. One critic, leveling presumably the ultimate compliment, said that when at their most ruthless, Fey and Fallon summon up the finest spirit of Belushi, the anarchic, savage Belushi, the one we all want to remember most fondly in our dreams. Of course, Belushi was never an Update anchor, though he did appear occasionally with one of his commentaries, pieces that started out on a calm and reasoned note and rapidly degenerated into hilarious tirades, ending with Belushi twirling himself off his chair and vanishing behind the Update desk. All right, there we go. Then it transitions into that era in the book. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'm going to shut this off and then come back about 3-4 hours from now, as scheduled, for some Simpsons chat tonight. Everybody have a good rest of your afternoon. See you soon.